Hey guys, recently there has been a lot of discussion in the Hearthstone community regarding the current standard meta. And at the center of this all was, at least pre-mini set, Zarimi Priest and post-mini set Imbue Hunter. And while I don't agree that the meta was bad, at least pre-mini set, I do agree that both of those decks are very frustrating and wanted to go into why I think they are this frustrating and what lessons to learn from that design-wise. How do we fix these issues? So let's have a look at first at Zarimi Priest. And Zarimi Priest is a particularly interesting case because if you look at the statistics, it was actually pretty bad at high ranks, so the deck performed worse the higher on the ladder you got, meaning that evidently it was very, very beatable. So how did it operate? Why is that? The deck used Neralax at 7 mana to cheat out Ysera and give you 3 additional mana to play 2 Briarspawn Drakes, which pose a lot of damage on their own, but are very lethal in combination with the extra turn from Timewinder Zarimi. This was a lot of damage, and with the combination of how early this combo would come out, oftentimes turn 8, turn 9 with the coin, maybe even turn 7, and how much damage it was, there was actually quite limited counterplay, and I feel like this is the first factor in what makes this deck so frustrating. Getting enough health to survive this combo, or maybe putting a big taunt in the way, while theoretically possible, happened very, very rarely. Like I did it once with Death Knight that I had enough health to just straight up survive the combo, and I did it once again with Death Knight that I put a large enough starship in the way so that their Briarspawn Drakes just died and they could not defeat me. But aside from that, particularly slower decks have a very hard time. Like, you can play Dirty Red, but the deck is very minion dense, and just hitting a Briarspawn Drake often isn't very enough, so you have to specifically hit Neralax or Zarimi, or your Dirty Red just doesn't do a whole lot. And I think that's quite the frustrating experience for both players, when the game just comes down to what does Dirty Red hit. But that was not enough to make slower decks consistently beat Zarimi. The only way to actually consistently do so was aggression. And the best decks of the format, Rogue in whatever variation, and Drunk Paladin could do so. But particularly if we look at Drunk Paladin, aside from vicious Slither Spear openers, the deck also needed a couple of turns to get going. Like, it really only started turn 4, turn 5, turn 6 that it cheated out those big minions with the light bots, with Sea Shanty. So even for that deck, if you didn't play it quite optimally, you could very easily lose to Zarimi Priest. Just delaying your threats by a singular turn could often cost you the game. Because not only does Zarimi Priest combo that early, with repackage, they often have a very strong board clear on turn 7, so you would often have to beat them on turn 6. And if you start putting out threats turn 4, turn 5, that's obviously quite difficult. If you piloted the deck well, it did beat Zarimi Priest very consistently, but it wasn't actually that straightforward. Whereas, and now we get to the second factor why I think Zarimi Priest is so frustrating, playing Zarimi Priest was very straightforward. The deck was incredibly linear, and there wasn't a whole lot you could do wrong. It was very difficult to put them in awkward situations, because in the first couple of turns, they often actually could contest the board relatively well with their low-cost dragons. With all the tutors they have, they are very likely to get the combo, and with the way the combo works, you don't really have situations where you have to maybe use a combo piece to stay alive, like we had in the past with Malygos Druid, for example. Malygos Druid would sometimes have to use their damage spells as removal to stay alive, weakening their combo as a result. Zarimi Priest doesn't really have that. Either you find the combo in time or you don't. And This, I think, is the big issue, that it has very little ways of counterplay. Like tempo is the only very consistent one, and even those are difficult to attain, whereas the deck itself is very easy to pilot. And this obviously at lower ranks, where people had more difficulties actually beating the deck due to, well, suboptimal play, people just gravitated to Zerimi Priest themselves. Obviously. Especially if you don't really have the time to put in to really learn Drunk Paladin. Like, it's not a super difficult deck, but there were some counterintuitive things, like just casting Divine Brew on your face to reduce your flicker boards and sea shanties if you didn't have anything better to do. Those things you would have to learn to actually beat Zerimi Priest consistently, whereas Zerimi Priest, you just play your cards, you memorize the combo, and that's it. And it's not a difficult combo even to pull off. That really is frustrating, just the deck being so easy and so inevitable, whereas countering it is quite difficult. And arguably, this was made even worse with Imbue Hunter. Imbue Hunter, using its Imbue hero power to buff and reduce the cost of a King plush, and now, post-mini set, using Tending Dragonkin to copy that King plush for really a whole lot of damage. And arguably, this deck has even less parts of counterplay, because you couldn't even put a big taunt in the way. You couldn't gain enough health. Like, you wouldn't need a specific amount of health at a certain point, because the Imbue Hunter, if you have too much health, like, they could just imbue further and just wait with their combo, or wait to see both Dragonkins to get 3 King plushes and things like that. And this is a big issue, especially because Imbue Hunter could oftentimes combo even earlier than Zerimi, turn 5, turn 6, something like that even, which led to even less decks being able to get under it. Like, Drunk Paladin, while still being a good deck, fell off quite a bit. It was the clear best deck pre-mini set, and now it's not, because, well, Imbue Hunter is just too fast. If I put out my threats turn 4, turn 5, turn 6, and Imbue Hunter just kills me turn 6, that leads nowhere. So we basically only have, like, Aggro Paladin and certain Menagerie decks, as well as Rogue, that can beat the Hunter. And yeah, sometimes maybe even Imbue Druid. I haven't played that matchup enough to say quite that yet, but I feel like Imbue Druid could as well. But that's not the point. Like, getting under Imbue Druid is actually very, very difficult. Under Imbue Hunter, excuse me. Whereas playing Imbue Hunter is pretty easy, and it also has actually now, with the Tourist variant and Bursting Shot, pretty decent removal to get there. And this is just not a good design direction. If we look at other card games, the conclusion we have in Yu-Gi-Oh!, where combo decks are a lot more prevalent by the standards of Hearthstone, like, every single deck in Yu-Gi-Oh! For like the past 10-15 years has been a combo deck, kind of. Being able to OTK is not like a feature of a deck, but kind of a prerequisite to be a good deck. Like, almost every deck can OTK nowadays. The conclusion we had there is that those non-linear combo decks, where you don't do your combo the same, like, the combo isn't the same every single time, and things like that, are a lot more interesting to play against. But Yu-Gi-Oh! Also has a couple of features that make combo decks inherently a lot more interactive than compared to Hearthstone. And this is kind of, I feel like, an issue that Hearthstone keeps running into in its fundamental design. Because to make Hearthstone simple, we don't really have ways to interact on your opponent's turn. And I think that's actually a pretty good thing for online card games, because of latency and things like that. If we look at Legends of Runeterra, waiting for your opponent to confirm your every move every single time felt very sluggish. So I get why they made this decision, but that means that all interaction you want to do with your opponent has to happen before the turn. Like, we have to do things like resistance aura to make their spells more expensive before they combo. We have to use dirty red before they combo, or maybe use secrets like counterspell or something before they combo. While in other card games, you could actually directly respond to what your opponent is doing with something like Counterspell and Magic, or Effect Veiler, for example, in Yu-Gi-Oh! So you inherently have a lot less design space on how to interact with these combo decks, and this obviously makes them more difficult to design. And now we also have another issue. Well, back in the day, Druid and Warrior were the only decks that could, or the only classes that could gain significant amount of extra health in the form of armor. So a combo for maybe 18 or 20 damage or something was oftentimes enough. You would get a bit of chip damage in and then kill them. Today, combo decks often have to deal 30 damage or more to even be in consideration, because with cards like Ancient of Fear, not only do most classes have at least some form of extra health gain, we have just more classes with dedicated health gain. Like, it's not Druid and Warrior that can gain a lot of armor, Mage can as well. Death Knight has a lot of ways to increase their maximum life total, and this makes it very difficult for classes that can't do that. Like, Shaman and Priest have a lot of difficulties inherently to support slower decks because they can't get enough health total in the case of like combo decks like Zerimi Priest emerging. And don't get me wrong, even with Death Knight, it's difficult to gain enough health to get over Zerimi Priest or Imbue Hunter, but this makes obviously the balancing a lot more difficult, because a combo deck, to be viable, it has to deal over 30 damage. And I feel like that's an issue that also comes just from the power level. With power creep happening, things have to get better. So I feel like the direction of lowering the power can at some point get rid of this problem, but right now we're obviously not quite there yet, and I hope we get balance changes to address this. Mind you, I'm not trying to say that this is purely based on power level, but with the higher power level and smaller design space in these interactions with combo decks, there's obviously the chance is a lot higher for things to arise that work on this unhealthy axis, and the design team has to put a lot more effort into it to design interesting combos and interesting counterplay without either side getting too oppressive to the other. And the higher the power level, the more likely it is for things to slip through. Although I really don't understand why we even printed Tending Dragonkin. Like, yes, the Embers mini set was planned before, definitely, quite in advance. But if we see people being so frustrated with Zerimi Priest, can't we really just change this one singular card to make sure that we don't get an even worse version of the deck? I really don't get that. I feel like there could have been, like, maybe Tending Dragonkin was 2 mana. And they saw, well, Zerimi Priest is such an issue, maybe we make it 3 mana. But I feel like this issue with the card was very obvious, and I feel like there should have been something done about this, especially if we see that people just hate these kind of decks. So this is kind of where I stand. I don't think that Hearthstone or Standard is doomed by this. Like I said, the meta previously was very good, and we'll have to see if like further refinement in Imbue Hunter, but also in other decks, maybe push out Imbue Hunter. But I definitely hope still we see balanced changes soon, because once these decks get like too popular with a certain threshold, it just gets very frustrating and can warp the meta quite a bit, which I also don't think is particularly healthy to have this kind of deck warp the meta. So that's where I stand. Thanks for tuning in. Have a nice day. Bye.